I am Liam, 29 years old. After working 23 days straight to fund my younger brother's startup business, I woke up in an intensive care unit with a broken spine, only to realize my entire family had abandoned me. While I was literally facing paralysis, lying in a hospital bed signing my own surgical consent forms with a trembling hand, my own mother told me on the phone, "You're young and strong, Liam. Julian needs us here to meet investors." They laughed, posed for photos, and drank expensive champagne with strangers in San Diego, leaving me to face a 7-hour spinal fusion completely alone. But there is one thing they didn't know. The hospital security cameras caught a secret guardian watching over me every single night. Someone my parents had banished from our family 18 years ago. Someone who held the key to a $250,000 inheritance that would change my life forever. And today, my parents are the ones facing foreclosure and bankruptcy, begging me for the very money they thought they were entitled to. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their golden child's empire and took my life back, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare began. The first thing I remember is the color white. Blinding, clinical white, paired with the relentless, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. I didn't know where I was. I just knew that every single time I tried to draw a breath, it felt like someone was dragging a jagged piece of glass down my back. Couldn't move my neck. Couldn't turn my head. Panic started to rise in my chest. A primal, suffocating fear. Then, a face leaned over me. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was a nurse with kind, tired eyes. She checked the 4-line running into my arm and offered a soft, reassuring smile. "Welcome back, Liam," she said softly. "You're at Presbyterian Hospital. You were in a car accident. Do you remember?" I tried to nod, but the agony that shot through my cervical spine was so blinding I almost blacked out again. I must have made a terrible sound because she immediately pressed a small plastic button into my right hand. "Pain button," she instructed. "Don't be a hero. You have 3 fractured vertebrae and a herniated disc. We had to stabilize you, but you need major surgery. Soon." Surgery. The word hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I tried to speak, but my throat was scraped raw from the breathing tube they had already removed. I managed to croak out a single, raspy syllable. "Family?" The nurse's expression shifted slightly. A flicker of pity crossed her features, and I hated it immediately. "Your boss is here," she said gently. "He's been sitting in the waiting room for hours, calling the desk every 20 minutes. Should I send him in?" My boss, David, the CEO of the marketing firm where I worked 80-hour weeks. I blinked to say yes. When David walked in, he looked completely out of place in his tailored navy suit, holding a lukewarm cup of cafeteria coffee. He was a man who ran our company with an iron fist, never showing emotion, never letting anyone see him sweat during high-stakes client pitches. But right now, his eyes were red, and he looked older than his 50 years. "Jesus, Liam," David breathed out, pulling a plastic chair close to my bed. "You scared the absolute hell out of us." I tried to reach for my phone on the tray table. I needed to call my parents. I needed my mom. Even at 29, when you are broken and bleeding in a hospital bed, you just want your mother. David caught my hand gently and gently pushed it back down to the mattress. "Don't," David said, his voice unusually thick. "I already handled it. The doctors told me everything. You are scheduled for spinal fusion tomorrow morning. Probably 6 to 8 weeks of recovery minimum. I called your emergency contacts. I spoke to your mother." David paused. He looked physically uncomfortable, adjusting his tie, looking anywhere but at my face. "She asked me to tell you," David continued, choosing his words with agonizing care, "that she and your dad are dealing with something important right now. But they'll come as soon as they can." Something important. The words echoed in my mind over the steady beep of the heart monitor. Something more important than their eldest son lying in the ICU with a shattered spine. I closed my eyes, and a single tear escaped, burning a hot trail down my temple. I knew exactly what that something important was. It was Julian's launch party. Julian, my 24-year-old brother, the golden child, the visionary, the startup genius who had spent the last 12 months building an app with $85,000 of my hard-earned savings. The launch party happening tonight in San Diego, the one I had paid $12,000 to cater. The luxury event space I had secured with another $8,000 of my own money. The promotional materials, the investor gift bags, the photographer, every single dime came straight out of my checking account, while Julian's business accounts remained mysteriously barren. "They're coming, right?" David asked, seeing the devastation written all over my face. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to defend them. I wanted to tell David that my family wouldn't choose a networking event over my life. But I couldn't speak. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the screeching tires at 5:30 a.m. weren't the worst thing to hit me today. The worst thing was knowing I was about to go under the knife, and the people who brought me into this world couldn't be bothered to show up. But I had no idea just how dark things were about to get, because the true betrayal hadn't even started yet. To understand the absolute insanity of my family dynamic, you have to understand the role I was assigned at birth. In my family, I wasn't just a son. I was a utility. I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who fixed the leaks, paid the bills, and never asked for anything in return. Julian, on the other hand, was the artist, the dreamer. When I was applying for state colleges and working night shifts at a warehouse to pay my own tuition, my parents were remortgaging their house to send Julian to a private liberal arts university out of state. When I graduated and moved into a tiny, roach-infested studio apartment so I could save money, they were co-signing a lease on a luxury high-rise for Julian so he could soak in the creative energy of the city. I suffered from terminal good boy syndrome. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that if I just worked hard enough, if I just provided enough, they would eventually look at me the way they looked at him. I wanted their pride. I wanted their love. And they knew exactly how to weaponize that desperation. Lying in that hospital bed, pumped full of morphine, my mind drifted back to the spreadsheet. The one saved on my laptop under a fake folder named Taxes 2023. I kept it hidden because looking at the final tally made me physically ill. I had drained my 401k contributions for 3 years. I had skipped every vacation. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with a rattling engine. I ate cheap ramen on weeknights while making a 6-figure salary as a marketing director. Why? Because the total on that spreadsheet was $180,000. That is how much I had transferred to Julian over 3 years to fund his revolutionary tech startup. My phone vibrated on the tray table. It was 7:30 p.m. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I fumbled for it with clumsy fingers, my heart doing a pathetic leap of hope. Maybe they turned the car around. Maybe they were at the airport. "Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Liam, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" Her voice was bright, a little too loud, carrying the unmistakable background noise of clinking glasses and upbeat lounge music. "I have surgery tomorrow at 7 a.m. Mom," I rasped, gripping the phone tight. "Oh, honey, we know. David told us," she said, her tone shifting seamlessly into that familiar, pleading cadence she used whenever she was about to ask for something unreasonable. "Listen, we have a tiny problem. Julian's launch party is tonight. You remember, right? The one at the Riverside Event Center." "Mom, my spine is broken. The thing is," she continued, steamrolling right over my words as if I hadn't spoken at all. "Your father and I drove down to San Diego yesterday to help Julian set up. The event is starting in an hour. All the angel investors are going to be here. This could make or break your brother's entire future. We just don't think we can make it back to the hospital in time." A cold sweat broke out over my entire body. The morphine couldn't touch the sheer, freezing ache blooming in my chest. "It's a 16-hour drive," I whispered. "You could fly." "Mom, I have to sign consent forms warning me about paralysis. About death." "Don't be dramatic, Liam," she sighed. The exasperation in her voice was thick and heavy. "You're young and strong. The doctors know what they're doing. And honestly, Julian has been working toward this for so long. You know how hard it's been for him. The development, the setbacks. He really needs us here to make a good impression on these venture capitalists. I stared at the stark white wall of my hospital room. He needed them. He needed them to stand around drinking the champagne I paid for, in the venue I rented, pitching the app one funded. What about after? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion now. What about my recovery? Of course we'll come then, she chirped, relieved that I was supposedly giving in. As soon as the weekend is over and Julian has his follow-up meetings, we'll drive straight up. We should be there by Sunday afternoon. You'll probably be sleeping most of that time anyway. Oh, by the way, Julian says thank you. The caterer sent photos, the setup looks amazing. When this app takes off, you'll get everything paid back with interest. Gotta go. Honey, the first investors are walking in. We love you. Text us when you wake up from surgery. Click. She hung up. I didn't even get to say goodbye. That night, Dr. Vance, my neurosurgeon, came into the room with a clipboard. She was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes. She explained the spinal fusion procedure. 4 to 6 hours. Metal screws, rods, bone grafts. Risks include infection, chronic pain, nerve damage, paralysis, and in rare cases, death. Dr. Vance recited, handing me a pen. Is your family here? You might want them present for this conversation. They're on their way, I lied. My voice didn't even shake. Dr. Vance looked at me for a long, quiet moment. She looked at the empty chairs, the unwrinkled visitor sheets. Liam, you are 29. You can legally consent to this. But this is major, life-altering surgery. You shouldn't go through this alone. I took the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. I had been going through everything alone my entire life. Why should tonight be any different? Couldn't sleep. The pain was excruciating, but the silence in that room was worse. Around midnight, I managed to pick up my phone and open Instagram. Julian had posted 17 stories. The event space looked incredible. Gorgeous lighting, premium catering displays, a massive ice sculpture with his startup's logo. There was a signature cocktail menu. Everything I had bled for, looking absolutely flawless. And there they were. He had tagged our parents in almost every story. My mother was wearing a brand new designer dress. My father was in a custom-tailored suit I had never seen before. They were beaming, holding champagne flutes, posing arm in arm with wealthy investors. They had time to drive to San Diego. They had time to shop for high-end luxury outfits. They had time to smile for the cameras. They just didn't have time to drive back to save their oldest son. I locked my phone, laid my head back against the stiff hospital pillow, and for the first time since the accident, I let the tears fall. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I cried until my broken back throbbed in rhythm with my shattered heart. I thought that was rock bottom. I thought nothing could hurt more than seeing those photos. I was so incredibly wrong. The surgery took 7 hours. When I woke up in the recovery bay, the world was a hazy, drug-induced blur. But as my consciousness slowly returned, a new, terrifying reality set in. I couldn't feel my legs. From the waist down, there was absolutely nothing. It was like I ended at my stomach. The panic that seized me was violent. I started thrashing, gasping for air, the heart monitor screaming in alarm. Dr. Vance was at my bedside in seconds, shining a penlight into my eyes, her hands firm on my shoulders. Liam, look at me. Breathe. It's the spinal block. It's temporary anesthesia, she said clearly, her voice cutting through my terror. The surgery was a success. The fusion is solid. Feeling should return to your lower extremities in the next few hours. You are going to be okay. I collapsed back onto the bed, drenched in cold sweat. I was alive. I wasn't paralyzed. They moved me back to a private room. My boss, David, was there again. So was my assistant, Sam. Sam had brought a massive care package from the office, magazines, high-end snacks, a premium neck pillow, and a card signed by the entire marketing department. They stayed for an hour, making quiet jokes, making sure I drank water, treating me with more dignity and care than the people who shared my DNA. Around 4 p.m., The feeling started returning to my legs. And with the feeling came the pain. It was a crushing, agonizing fire radiating from my spine. I was gritting my teeth, waiting for the pain meds to kick in, when my phone rang. It was my mother. I took a shaky breath and answered. "Mom! Liam! Oh, thank goodness you're awake," she said. Her voice was breathless, hurried. "Listen, honey, I know you just got out of surgery and I'm sure you're doing great, you're so strong. But the launch party was incredible. Julian made so many connections. One investor is talking about a $500,000 funding round. Can you believe it?" I closed my eyes. "That's great, Mom. It really is. But here's the thing," she continued, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Julian has a massive follow-up dinner tonight with this angel investor at a Michelin star restaurant. And he really needs a new blazer. The one he wore last night got a champagne stain on it. Could you Venmo him $400? The hospital room suddenly felt very, very cold. "What? Just $400, Liam? His credit card is completely maxed out from the party expenses. You know how it is. Just send it over Venmo real quick so he can go to the boutique before they close." "His card is maxed out?" I repeated, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Mom, I paid for the party. I paid for the venue, the catering, the marketing. I gave him $180,000. I just had my spine fused together with titanium rods. I can't even walk to the bathroom by myself. And you are asking me to buy him a blazer? Oh, stop making everything about you," she snapped, the friendly facade dropping instantly. "This investor could change our entire family's life. Please, Liam, just do this one thing for your brother. You've always been so good about helping out." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button, and turned the device completely off. I let it drop onto the blanket. 2 hours later, the door to my room opened. I looked up, expecting a nurse. Instead, it was Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother. A wave of relief washed over me. At least someone from the family came. At least someone cared. Uncle Robert walked in holding a plastic bag of cheap grapes from Walmart. He set them on the counter and pulled up a chair. "Tough break, kid," he said, looking around the room, his eyes lingering on the expensive medical equipment. "You look okay, though. Color's good." "I have titanium in my spine, Uncle Robert," I said tiredly. Yeah. The doctors always make it sound worse than it is to bill the insurance," he chuckled, pulling out his phone. "So, how long you gonna milk this vacation? You know your brother is stressing out down in San Diego, right? He really needed that Venmo transfer." I stared at him. He didn't come to comfort me. He came as an emissary. "I'm not sending him another dime," I said quietly. Uncle Robert's eyes narrowed. He stood up, pacing near the door. "Look, Liam, don't be a selfish prick. Your parents are worried sick about Julian's meeting. You make good money. Stop playing the victim." He walked out into the hallway, but the door didn't close all the way. Through the crack, I saw him lift his phone to his ear. The hospital corridor was quiet, and his voice carried perfectly back into my room. "Yeah, Helen, it's me," Uncle Robert said. "I'm looking at him right now. He's fine. Totally conscious, talking back. He's not paralyzed. Yeah, I think he's just faking the severity so he doesn't have to foot the bill for Julian's dinner tonight. You know how cheap he gets. Don't worry. Enjoy the dinner. I'll keep an eye on him. My own uncle, spying on me, reporting back to my mother to confirm that my broken back was just a manipulative tactic to avoid paying for a blazer. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, it felt like a physical blow to the chest. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, David, my CEO, came to visit before heading to the office. He brought real coffee from a premium roaster downtown and a stack of paperwork I didn't need to look at. But David's face was grim. He sat down and rubbed his temples. "Liam, I need to ask you a sensitive question," David said, his professional demeanor slipping slightly. "Are you in financial trouble?" "No," I frowned, confused. I have great insurance and I have savings. Why? David sighed deeply. Your mother called our HR department this morning. She bypassed me entirely. She claimed you were in a medically induced coma and that you had unexpected medical expenses. She demanded we process a $2,000 emergency salary advance and route it directly to her bank account. My blood ran ice cold. She what? HR flagged it immediately and brought it to my desk, David said quietly. We didn't process it, Liam. But, Jesus, she was aggressive. She threatened to sue the company for withholding your wages. My mother had tried to steal from my employer. While I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery, she tried to defraud my company to get cash for Julian's lavish lifestyle in San Diego. The absolute humiliation washed over me like a tidal wave. My professional reputation, the one thing I had built entirely on my own, was being dragged through the mud by the woman who gave birth to me. David, I am so incredibly sorry, I choked out, tears of pure shame burning my eyes. David put a hand on my arm. You have nothing to apologize for. I've instructed security that if anyone from your family calls the office, they are to be routed to our legal department. Your job is safe. You just focus on walking again. When David left, I stared at the ceiling. I was entirely empty. They had bled my bank accounts dry. They had broken my spirit. They had abandoned me in my darkest hour, sent spies to mock my injuries, and tried to steal my wages. I had nothing left to give them. But in the silence of that hospital room, something shifted. The desperate, begging child inside me finally died. And in his place, a very cold, very angry man woke up. It was 2 a.m. on my 4th night in the hospital. The pain medications were wearing off, and the physical therapy from earlier that day had left every nerve in my back screaming. But physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of reality. I was weeping silently in the dark. Not the loud, gasping sobs of the first night, but the quiet, relentless tears of a man mourning the death of his own family while they were still alive. The door opened softly. It was Clara, the head nurse of the night shift. Clara was a veteran nurse in her 50s, a woman who had seen every tragedy and miracle these halls had to offer. She didn't turn on the harsh overhead lights. Instead, she pulled a chair up to my bed and handed me a box of tissues. They didn't come, did they? Clara asked softly. I shook my head, unable to speak. I've been a nurse for almost 30 years, Liam, Clara said, leaning forward. I have seen families sleep on the floor of the waiting room for weeks just to be near their loved ones. And I have seen families who don't show up at all. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Their absence is a reflection of their brokenness, not your worth. I wiped my eyes, letting out a bitter laugh. I gave them everything. I paid for my brother's entire life. I thought if I just did enough. You can't buy love from people who only value the transaction, Clara interrupted gently. She smoothed the blanket over my legs. My daughter is in medical school right now. She works 2 part-time jobs to pay her rent. I offered to take out a loan to help her. You know what she told me? She said, Mom, your job was to raise me. My job is to build my life. A real family doesn't bleed you dry, Liam. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then, Clara checked her watch, looked out into the empty hallway, and pulled a hospital-issued iPad from her large scrub pocket. I am technically violating protocol by showing you this, Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I could get a massive reprimand. But after seeing your uncle snooping around yesterday, and knowing your parents haven't shown their faces, I think you need to see this. She tapped the screen and opened the hospital's internal security camera feeds. She pulled up the archive for the hallway outside my room and selected a timestamp. Thursday, 11:47 p.m., the night after my surgery. I squinted at the small screen. The hallway was empty and dim. Then the elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. A woman stepped out. She looked to be in her late 60s, wearing an elegant trench coat, her graying hair pulled back into a neat twist. She walked slowly down the corridor until she stopped right outside my door. She didn't try to open it. She just stood there. In her hands, she held a small, high-end gift bag. She stood staring at my room number for almost 10 minutes. Then, she gently set the bag down at the nurse's station, spoke briefly to the nurse on duty, and walked back to the elevator. She came back the next night, too, Clara whispered, fast-forwarding the footage to Friday at midnight. Same woman, same quiet vigil outside my door, same drop-off at the desk. Who is she? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. She won't give us her name, Clara replied. She just asks for a detailed update on your vitals, leaves the gifts, and makes us promise not to tell you she was here. I looked over at the small table in the corner of my room. I had assumed the gifts sitting there were from corporate clients or distant coworkers. I asked Clara to hand them to me. My hands shook as I opened the first bag. Inside was a novel by my favorite obscure science fiction author, with a leather bookmark placed carefully at chapter 1. The next bag held a jar of premium lavender lotion, the exact scent I always bought to help me sleep when the marketing campaigns triggered my insomnia. The last bag contained a box of dark chocolate truffles from a tiny artisanal shop in my old college town. Someone knew I loved to read. Someone knew I struggled with sleep. Someone knew my favorite childhood treat. Someone who actually knew me. She's been here every single night, Liam, Clara said gently. While your parents were in San Diego drinking champagne, this stranger has been standing in the dark, making sure you survived. The mystery consumed me. It gave me a reason to fight through the agonizing physical therapy sessions the next day. I forced myself to stand. I forced myself to walk with the walker, the titanium rods in my spine screaming in protest. I needed to be awake and alert by midnight. I needed to catch her. On the sixth night, at exactly 11:45 p.m., I asked Clara to leave my door wide open. I sat propped up in bed, my heart in my throat. At 11:50 p.m., I heard the soft click of heels on the linoleum floor. The footsteps paused outside my door. I held my breath. Slowly, the woman from the security footage stepped into the doorway. Up close, I could see the resemblance. She had the exact same jawline as my father. The same deep-set hazel eyes that looked back at me in the mirror every morning. She stood frozen, gripping the doorframe, looking like she was terrified I would yell at her to leave. "Hi!" I whispered. She let out a choked sob, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Liam. Oh my God, Liam. Who are you?" I asked, though the truth was already forming in the back of my mind. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another, until she was standing at the foot of my bed. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I don't have the right, but when I heard about the crash, I couldn't stay away." She took a deep breath, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "My name is Eleanor. I'm your father's sister. I'm the aunt you don't remember. Because your parents cut me out of your life 18 years ago." The room started to spin. 18 years ago. I was 11. I had vague memories of a woman who smelled like lavender and brought me books. A woman who suddenly vanished from our family photos. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why did they cut you off?" Eleanor stepped closer, pulling a chair to my bedside. She took my hand, and her grip was fiercely protective. "Because I told them they were destroying you," Eleanor said fiercely. "Because I called them out for treating Julian like a god and treating you like a servant. Because when you were 11, I offered to pay for your entire college education so they wouldn't force you to take out loans while they paid for Julian's private prep school. They told me to mind my own business. They told me if I ever tried to give you money, they would call the police for harassment. They chose their pride and their golden child over you. And I couldn't watch it happen." I stared at her, the pieces of my entire life suddenly rearranging themselves. "You've been watching me for 18 years? Not stalking, just making sure you were surviving," she smiled through her tears. "I couldn't be in your life, but I could make sure you didn't drown. Liam, that state college scholarship you got? The one that paid your tuition when your parents claimed they were broke." My breath hitched. Yeah. There was no scholarship, Eleanor said softly. It was me. I routed the money through a private educational trust so your parents wouldn't know. The tears I had been holding back finally broke free. This woman, cast out and demonized by my parents, had secretly funded my education. She had saved me from crippling student debt while my parents were siphoning my adult income for my brother's vanity projects. I set up a fund for you the day they kicked me out, Eleanor continued, pulling her phone from her purse. She opened a banking app and turned the screen toward me. I added to it every Christmas, every birthday, every time I saw them take from you. I was waiting for the day you finally woke up and realized you needed an escape hatch. I looked at the screen. The balance was $247,000. It's yours, Liam, she said, squeezing my hand. It has always been yours. You are going to use this to pay your medical bills, buy a house, and build a life they can never touch. In that hospital room, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the warmth of a woman who actually loved me, the last chains of my childhood trauma shattered. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't unloved. I was just looking for love in the wrong place. And as the sun began to rise on my 7th day in the hospital, I knew exactly what I had to do. My parents wanted a war over money. They were about to learn that they had just armed their enemy with a nuclear bomb. On the 7th day of my hospital stay, Dr. Vance finally walked into my room with a discharge clipboard tucked under her arm. She stood at the foot of my bed, her expression a mix of professional satisfaction and genuine concern. She ran through a list of incredibly strict, terrifying instructions. I was not allowed to drive. I was not allowed to navigate stairs. I was absolutely forbidden from lifting anything heavier than a single gallon of milk. I was looking at months of grueling, agonizing physical therapy just to be able to walk down a hallway without looking like a broken marionette. She asked the standard protocol question about who was taking me home. For the first time in my entire 29 years of existence, I did not have to manufacture a lie about having a warm, supportive family waiting in the wings. I looked over at Eleanor, my aunt, the secret guardian who had slept in a rigid plastic hospital chair every single night while my parents drank champagne in San Diego. I told the doctor my aunt was taking me home, and the relief in Dr. Vance's eyes was palpable. Eleanor lived in a beautiful, heavily wooded neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado. Her property was a sprawling, single-story sanctuary with massive floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound cedar porch. But what broke me completely, what shattered the last remaining wall of my emotional defenses, was the guest room. While my parents were down in Southern California networking with venture capitalists and parading my younger brother around like a prodigy, Eleanor had been frantically preparing her home for a broken man she had not spoken to in 18 years. She had rented a specialized medical bed. She had hired contractors to install heavy-duty grab bars in the guest bathroom. She had a custom walker, perfectly adjusted to my exact height, waiting right by the front door. She had utilized a portion of the secret college fund she had saved for me, the very same fund my parents had driven her away over, to buy me a fighting chance at a dignified recovery. I had been settled into Eleanor's guest room for exactly 3 hours when my cell phone practically exploded. I had kept the device turned off during the agonizing car ride home, but the moment I powered it back on, the screen lit up with a relentless barrage of notifications. There were 37 missed calls in total. 21 from my mother, 12 from my father, 4 from Julian. A new voicemail notification pinged loudly in the quiet room. I sat on the edge of the medical mattress, my newly fused spine aching with a dull, throbbing intensity that radiated down to my knees, and I hit play. My mother's voice filled the space, and it was completely devoid of any warmth, any maternal instinct, or any concern for the fact that her eldest son had just survived a massive trauma. "Liam, you need to call us back right this second." Her voice shrilled through the speaker, tight with indignation. "We drove all the way back from San Diego this morning. We went straight to your apartment, and you aren't even there. The landlord said you moved your things into storage. I called the hospital, and the head nurse had the audacity to tell me you were discharged to some woman named Eleanor. Are you completely out of your mind? You called her? After everything that woman did to this family?" Listen to me, Julian's investor meetings went relatively well, but his corporate credit card is completely locked by the bank. He needs a $10,000 transfer by tomorrow morning to secure a server lease for the application's backend. Call me back immediately and send the money. There it was, the absolute, unvarnished truth of my existence to them. No questions about my pain levels. No inquiries about the titanium hardware now permanently embedded in my back. Just pure, unadulterated entitlement. They had driven back to Colorado not to nurse their injured child back to health, but to aggressively collect their next paycheck. They viewed my entire salary as their personal, unlimited slush fund, a well that existed solely to be drained for Julian's benefit. I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. A week ago, before the accident, I would have panicked. A week ago, my heart would have raced with anxiety, and I would have frantically logged into my mobile banking app, transferred the funds from my dwindling savings account, and drafted a pathetic text message apologizing for the delay. But the terrified, desperate man who went into that operating room had died on the surgical table. I called her back. She answered on the very first ring, clearly waiting with the phone in her hand. "Liam, finally!" she snapped, her tone dripping with exasperation. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to have my own son ignoring my calls while we are trying to conduct serious business? Log into your account and send the $10,000 right now." Julian is pacing the floor and panicking. "No." The word hung in the air, sharp, heavy, and final. It was a complete sentence. "Excuse me?" she scoffed, genuinely unable to comprehend my refusal. In her reality, my compliance was a law of physics. "Liam, do not play these petty games with me right now. This is your brother's company on the line." "I said no, Mom," I replied, my voice remarkably steady, devoid of the familiar tremor that usually accompanied my rare moments of defiance. "Not $10,000. Not $400 for a designer blazer. Not a single dime ever again. I know the truth about the state college money. I know Eleanor paid for my entire education while you lied to my face, claimed it was a scholarship, and continued to drain my bank accounts for years. I am completely done. I am done being your personal ATM. I am done funding a grown man's delusions. Do not call this number again." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for her screaming response. I immediately blocked her number. I went into my contacts and blocked my father. I blocked Julian. I sat in the quiet room, staring at the blank screen, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs, waiting for the crippling guilt to consume me. I waited for the conditioned fear of abandonment to strike. But the guilt never came. Instead, a massive, overwhelming wave of absolute, pristine relief washed over my entire body. The next 4 months were physically the hardest of my entire life. The physical therapy regimen was borderline medieval torture. Learning how to walk, sit, and stand without bending my fused spine required a level of mental fortitude and sheer willpower I honestly did not know I possessed. There were days I cried from the pain, gripping the parallel bars in the clinic until my hands cramped. But emotionally, I was undergoing a massive promotion in my own self-worth. I was healing from the inside out. During the 3rd month of my recovery, David, my CEO, drove up to Boulder to visit me at Eleanor's house. He brought a briefcase full of company files, but more importantly, he brought a massive business proposition. Our marketing firm was in the process of launching a brand new venture capital branch. The objective was to acquire struggling, debt-ridden tech startups, strip them down to their core assets, and rebuild their marketing and operational architecture from the ground up. "You have a brilliant, ruthless eye for what fails and what succeeds in the tech space," David told me as we sat on Eleanor's cedar porch, drinking iced tea in the afternoon sun. "I want you to head this new division, Liam. I want you at the helm. But to do that, it requires a significant financial buy-in. An equity stake to make you a true partner." I looked down at the banking app on my phone. The massive inheritance Eleanor had given me. $247,000. It wasn't just a safety net anymore. It was seed money for a completely new life. I didn't just want a new job title. I wanted real, tangible power. I wanted absolute, undeniable leverage over the very industry my brother was currently flailing in. I transferred a massive chunk of that money directly into David's firm. I did not return to the corporate office as a mere marketing director. I returned as a senior partner of our new acquisitions branch. Meanwhile, Julian's golden, fragile empire was rapidly crumbling to dust. The wealthy angel investor they had endlessly bragged about in San Diego? He pulled his funding after a massive due diligence audit revealed that Julian had absolutely zero actual business acumen. The investor discovered that Julian had burned through the initial $180,000 I had provided on lavish launch parties, luxury dinners, and pointless marketing swag instead of actual software development. Julian was drowning in an ocean of corporate debt, and because my parents had foolishly co-signed his early business loans, they were chained directly to the anchor of his sinking ship. They tried to reach me for months. They showed up unannounced at my old apartment complex, only to find out from the bewildered landlord that I had broken the lease and vanished. They tried to bypass the security desk at my corporate office, but David had taken the liberty of having them permanently blacklisted from the building. They were desperate, cornered, and entirely cut off from their primary funding source, me. Then came the crisp autumn night of our firm's annual corporate gala. It was a massive, high-profile networking event held at the most premium downtown hotel in the city, designed to celebrate the launch of our new acquisitions branch. I was standing near the open bar, wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit that perfectly hid the slight, lingering stiffness in my posture. I was holding a glass of sparkling water, surrounded by industry giants, chatting casually with David about a new logistics software company we were looking to aggressively absorb. The fatal flaw of my family's complacency was that they always fundamentally believed I would eventually cave. They believed my silence over the past few months was just a prolonged temper tantrum, not a permanent, unyielding boundary. They genuinely believed that if they just ambushed me in a high-pressure public setting, my deeply ingrained good boy syndrome would automatically kick in, and I would write them a massive check just to avoid a humiliating public scene. I saw them the exact moment they aggressively pushed past the distracted hostess at the main ballroom entrance. My mother was wearing the exact same designer dress she wore in the San Diego Instagram photos, though she looked significantly more frantic and unkempt. My father flanked her, his face already red with bubbling indignation. And Julian looked like a terrified, cornered animal. His expensive blazer was deeply wrinkled, his usual arrogant, tech bro swagger completely replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy as he scanned the room. They spotted me standing across the expansive room. My mother's eyes locked onto mine, and a victorious, malicious smile spread across her face. She thought she finally had me trapped. She thought she was about to publicly shame me into complete financial obedience. She marched straight toward me, parting the crowd of wealthy investors and executives like Moses parting the Red Sea. David noticed the immediate shift in my posture, followed my gaze, and stepped smoothly to my side, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Liam," my mother announced loudly, her voice booming across the sophisticated, quiet hum of the ballroom. Several high-profile executives stopped their conversations and turned to look. "How incredibly nice of you to finally show your face. We have been trying to reach you for 4 agonizing months. Your brother is in the middle of a massive financial crisis, and you are standing here drinking cocktails while your own family falls apart." The entire immediate circle of investors went dead silent. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. "You need to step outside right now, Helen," David said firmly, stepping smoothly between me and my mother, projecting an aura of absolute corporate authority. "This is a private, invite-only corporate event. You are not on the guest list, and you are currently trespassing." "I am speaking to my son," my mother spat, completely ignoring David's warning. She took another aggressive step closer to me, her voice dripping with venomous authority. "You are going to walk out of this room right now, Liam, and you are going to fix this mess. Julian's server hosts are threatening a massive lawsuit. They are going to permanently seize his intellectual property and shut down the application by tomorrow morning if a $150,000 debt isn't settled immediately. You are going to write a check tonight, or so help me God. You are completely dead to this family. Julian stood slightly behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, trying desperately to look imposing but mostly just looking pathetic. Come on, Liam, Julian chimed in, projecting his voice specifically so the surrounding VIPs could hear his manufactured grievance. Stop being so incredibly selfish. You make plenty of money here. You owe me this after ditching my launch party. I ditched his launch party. I was lying on an operating table having my shattered spine fused together with titanium hardware, facing the very real possibility of permanent paralysis, and he framed it as me flaking on his networking party. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the familiar, suffocating panic that used to govern my every single interaction with them. I just felt a cold, surgical precision radiating through my veins. I do not owe you a single thing, Julian, I said, my voice echoing clearly and calmly in the quiet space. My father finally stepped forward, his face flushed purple with explosive rage. You ungrateful little brat. We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us? By abandoning your own blood when we are on the verge of losing absolutely everything? We will ruin your professional reputation in this city. Everyone in this room is going to know what a greedy, heartless bastard you really are. The room was completely captivated by the spectacle. The heavy hitters of the tech and marketing world were silently watching this toxic family drama unfold. My mother smirked confidently, waiting for me to crumble under the crushing weight of public humiliation. Instead of apologizing, instead of reaching for my checkbook, I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored suit jacket. You want to talk about Julian's massive debt? I asked, my voice ringing out with absolute, unshakable authority. Let's talk about it. I pulled out a thick, neatly folded legal document and handed it directly to Julian. He took it instinctively, his brow furrowing in deep confusion as his eyes scanned the embossed letterhead. What the hell is this? Julian muttered, unfolding the thick parchment paper. That is a formal notice of acquisition, I explained, looking directly into my mother's wide eyes. For the last 4 months, Julian, you have been completely ignoring the collection notices from Apex Server Hosting. You defaulted on your primary infrastructure loans. You arrogantly assumed they would just give you more time because you think you are so charming and full of potential. You thought you could just wait until you bullied me into paying it off. Julian's face started to drain of all color. He looked down at the document, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal jargon. Apex Hosting did not want the financial hassle of a drawn-out legal battle with a failed startup. I continued, my voice steady, carrying to every single corner of the captivated ballroom. So, they did what hosting companies do with toxic debt. They sold your debt portfolio to a venture capital firm that specializes in liquidating failed tech startups. They sold it for pennies on the dollar to a firm called Vanguard Acquisitions. So what? My father interrupted aggressively, though a hint of uncertainty finally crept into his tone. We'll deal with Vanguard. We'll negotiate a long-term payment plan. Just give us the cash for the initial down payment, Liam, and we'll handle the rest. I turned my cold gaze to my father. You cannot negotiate with Vanguard, Dad. Why the hell not? He demanded, stepping forward. I gestured to David, who was standing beside me with a quiet, absolutely lethal smile on his face. Because David is the chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions. And as of last month, I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch for one agonizing, perfect second. I am the senior partner. I used the money Eleanor saved for me to buy into the firm. I bought your debt, Julian. I own the loans on your servers. I own the legal liens on your intellectual property. I hold every single piece of paper keeping your pathetic vanity project alive. The color completely and instantly vanished from my mother's face. Her jaw actually slackened in pure, unadulterated shock. What? Julian breathed out, his hands visibly shaking as he stared at the bold signature at the very bottom of the document. My signature. Liam, senior partner. You came here tonight to bully a terrified employee into writing you a check, I said, stepping right into my mother's personal space. She instinctively took a step back, suddenly realizing that the towering power dynamic of our entire relationship had completely shifted. But I am not an employee anymore. I am the bank, and I am officially calling in your loans. Effective immediately. Vanguard is seizing your startup's assets tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m. You cannot do this, my mother shrieked, the devastating reality of the situation finally breaking through her thick wall of delusion. We co-signed those loans, Liam. We put our names on the paperwork. If you call in that debt, the bank is going to come after our house. They will come after our retirement accounts. I know, I said coldly, devoid of any sympathy. You really should have read the fine print before you funded his reckless delusions with your mortgage. You wanted a serious business meeting, Helen? Consider this your official notice. Now, get out of my event before I have security physically throw you out onto the street. David raised a single hand in the air, and within seconds, 3 massive security guards in dark suits materialized from the shadows of the ballroom perimeter. Liam, please, Julian begged, his voice cracking loudly, the arrogant tech bro facade shattering into a million pathetic pieces. I'll do anything you want. I'll give you equity. I'll make you a full partner in the application. Just give me more time. Your app is completely worthless, Julian, I said, turning my back on him. And so is your equity. The security guards moved in swiftly, grabbing my father by the arm when he tried to lunge forward in a blind rage, and forcefully escorted my screaming, hysterical family out of the ballroom. The heavy, ornate wooden doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off my mother's wailing. For a moment, the massive room was perfectly, stunningly silent. Then, an older, highly respected investor from a massive tech conglomerate raised his glass of scotch high in the air toward me. Brilliant, ruthless negotiation tactic, son, the investor said with an appreciative smirk. Remind me never to sit across the table from you. The tension finally broke. The jazz music swelled back up through the speakers. The room returned to its wealthy, sophisticated hum, but the immense respect in the eyes of my industry peers had solidified into something absolutely unbreakable. I had faced the terrifying monsters of my past in the open light of day, and I had absolutely decimated them. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The very next morning, I arrived at my office at 7 a.m. and finalized the total liquidation of Julian's company. I signed the paperwork with a gold pen. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. I felt incredibly, vibrantly alive. That afternoon, I left the corporate office early and took a black car to a high-end luxury dealership situated on the wealthiest side of town. I walked through the sliding glass doors, completely bypassing the practical SUVs and the sensible luxury sedans, and walked straight toward the center of the showroom floor. I had spent my entire 20s driving a rattling, beat-up, terrifyingly unreliable piece of junk because every spare dollar I ever earned went straight to my family's demands. Not anymore. I pointed directly at the pristine, flawless silver Porsche 911 sitting under the bright display lights. The interior leather smelled like absolute, uncompromising freedom. The engine, when the dealer started it up, roared like a caged beast finally waiting to be unleashed. I didn't finance the vehicle. I didn't ask for a convenient payment plan. I handed the stunned dealer a certified cashier's check, signed the registration paperwork, and drove that magnificent machine right off the lot. When I confidently pulled that silver Porsche 911 into my newly assigned reserved parking spot at the firm the next day, Lucas, the rival coworker who had maliciously tried to steal my clients while I was fighting for my life in the hospital, was walking through the garage. He stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw physically dropping as I stepped out of the luxury sports car, my custom suit tailored perfectly to my frame, my posture straight and commanding. He didn't say a single word. He just lowered his head, his face burning red with envy, and scurried into the elevator. The balance of power in my life had not just shifted. It had been completely, permanently rewritten. 3 years passed. 3 long, beautiful years of brilliant, uninterrupted peace and monumental personal growth. The transition from a terrified, manipulated son to a ruthless, highly successful executive was completely seamless. Our acquisitions branch flourished immensely under my strict direction. I utilized my massive bonus checks to buy a stunning penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. I started writing again, pouring my painful experiences into a raw, unfiltered memoir about financial abuse and toxic family trauma. The book became a massive, overnight bestseller, resonating deeply with thousands of people who had been unfairly designated as their family's sacrificial lamb. But without a doubt, the absolute best part of those 3 years was Julia. I met her during an incredibly tense, hostile takeover negotiation. She was the opposing corporate lawyer, sharp, brilliant, terrifyingly competent, and fiercely protective of her own personal and professional boundaries. We went toe-to-toe in the boardroom for a full week, arguing over contract clauses, before I finally relented and asked her out to dinner. Julia loved me for my mind, for my resilience, and for the simple, beautiful fact that I never once needed her to fix me. We built a strong, equal partnership based on mutual respect, entirely free of the toxic, draining codependency that defined my chaotic past. I had not heard a single word from my family since the explosive night of the corporate gala. I reasonably assumed they had slinked off into the dark shadows to lick their wounds and curse my name. But karma, as they say, never misses an address, and it always collects its debts with interest. I was sitting in my favorite downtown coffee shop on a gloomy, rainy Tuesday afternoon, casually reviewing a complex contract with Julia over espresso, when a man awkwardly and hesitantly approached our small table. He looked terribly haggard, his clothes unwashed and ill-fitting, his shoulders slumped in profound defeat. It took me a full minute to recognize him through the scruff of his beard. It was Mark, Julian's former best friend and the arrogant co-founder of his failed tech startup. "Liam," Mark said nervously, wringing his hands together like a guilty child. "I know you probably hate my guts, and you have every right to, but I saw you sitting through the window. I really need to talk to you for a second." Julia immediately bristled, her protective lawyer instincts flaring up defensively, ready to verbally eviscerate him. But I placed a gentle, calming hand on her arm. I gestured for Mark to sit down in the empty chair. "You have exactly 2 minutes, Mark. Speak fast." Mark collapsed into the chair, looking at me with wide, incredibly desperate eyes. "I need a job, Liam. Anything at your firm. A junior marketing role, basic data entry, fetching coffee, I really don't care. Julian completely ruined me." "Julian ruined himself?" I corrected flatly, my tone devoid of emotion. "You chose to eagerly ride his coattails and spend my money. You honestly don't understand how incredibly bad it got after you liquidated the company." Mark rushed out, his voice trembling with residual anxiety. "It was an absolute bloodbath. Julian had a complete, terrifying mental breakdown. He refused to accept any responsibility. He blamed the market, he blamed the developers, he blamed everyone but himself. We had a massive, explosive falling out, a total business divorce that ended in screaming matches. But that's not even the worst part. Do you have any idea what happened to your parents?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, my expression unreadable. "I don't." "They lost absolutely everything," Mark whispered, leaning anxiously across the small table. "When you formally called in that massive debt, the bank aggressively pursued the guarantors. Your parents. They had completely drained their retirement savings to fund Julian's lavish lifestyle in San Diego. They couldn't make the massive penalty payments. The bank initiated a ruthless foreclosure on their house. A cold, hard knot in my chest suddenly unspooled, replaced by a chilling sense of finality. Your dad tried to illegally hide the remaining money by moving it into offshore accounts, but he got caught by the auditors, Mark continued, his eyes darting around the cafe like he was telling a terrifying ghost story. They lost the house. They lost all their real estate equity. They were forced to move into a tiny, run-down, two-bedroom apartment on the dangerous outskirts of the city. Julian is living on their lumpy couch, aggressively refusing to get a normal minimum wage job because he arrogantly claims it's beneath a visionary entrepreneur. They fight constantly, screaming at all hours of the night. It's a living hell, Liam. They are completely, utterly destitute. I looked out the cafe window at the heavy rain hitting the glass pane. 18 months ago, the mere thought of my parents losing their cherished home would have sent me into a devastating spiral of guilt and frantic action. I would have drained my own accounts to save them from ruin. But now, sitting across from the man who helped Julian gleefully bleed me dry, I felt nothing but a profound, satisfying sense of universal balance. They made their bed, Mark, I said calmly, looking him dead in the eye. And they used my hard-earned money to buy the silk sheets. I am not hiring you. You stood by and happily drank the expensive champagne I paid for while I was fighting for my life alone in an intensive care unit. Actions have severe consequences. Have a good afternoon. I stood up smoothly, helped Julia with her designer coat, and we walked out of the coffee shop together, leaving Mark staring miserably into his empty, trembling hands. The collapse of the villain isn't always a cinematic, fiery explosion. Sometimes, it is just the quiet, miserable reality of waking up every single day in a disastrous mess entirely of your own making, with absolutely no one left to blame and no one left to save you. My family had blindly worshipped the golden child, and the golden child had predictably burned their entire world to ash. 6 months after my brief, revealing encounter with Mark, my cell phone rang while I was working in my home office. It was an unsaved number, but the area code belonged to my childhood hometown. I almost let it go straight to voicemail, but an odd, unexplainable instinct made me swipe the green button and hold the phone to my ear. Hello, Liam. The voice on the other end was rough, brittle, aged by what sounded like a decade of intense stress, but I recognized it instantly. It was my father. He didn't sound angry anymore. He didn't sound arrogant or demanding. He just sounded utterly, completely defeated. What do you want? I asked, my tone perfectly neutral, an impenetrable fortress. I'm calling because... His voice cracked painfully, a dry, raspy sound that spoke of endless sleepless nights. I'm calling about your mother, Liam. She's incredibly sick. It's aggressive pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The oncology doctors are saying she only has a few weeks left at most. She's in a hospice care facility. I stopped pacing. I stood dead center in the middle of my expansive penthouse living room, staring blankly out at the glittering city lights. I felt a complicated, overwhelming rush of emotions flood my system. There was a dull, distant ache of sadness, not for the cruel woman she actually was, but for the loving, supportive mother she could have been. There was sharp anger for the manipulative timing of it all. And there was a terrifying, momentary tug of the old, familiar guilt, trying desperately to pull me back into the dark, suffocating waters of familial obligation. I am sorry she is sick, I said carefully, measuring every single syllable to ensure no emotion leaked through. She wants to see you, my father pleaded, the raw desperation leaking heavily through his words. She wants to make things right before she goes. Please, Liam. I know we made terrible mistakes. I know Julian messed up everything. But she is your mother. You can't possibly let her die without saying goodbye. It was the ultimate emotional trap. The final boss of toxic family manipulation. The ingrained societal expectation that deathbed regrets instantly erase decades of sustained, calculated psychological and financial abuse. I closed my eyes tight and vividly pictured the cold hospital room. I pictured the exact moment Dr. Vance handed me the terrifying surgical consent forms. I pictured the blinding, white-hot pain of waking up and feeling absolutely nothing below my waist. I pictured my mother, laughing joyously in a brand-new designer dress in San Diego, aggressively demanding Venmo transfers while I bled onto a hospital mattress. "No, she isn't my mother," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, unbreakable whisper. "She stopped being my mother the night she chose a networking event over my emergency spinal surgery. She stopped being my mother the day she demanded money while I was crying in physical agony. She doesn't want to see me to make things right, Dad. She wants to see me to alleviate her own crushing guilt before she dies. I am not her emotional custody arrangement. I will not carry her sins for her into the next life." "Liam, please," he sobbed openly, a wet, pathetic sound into the phone receiver. "Have some goddamn mercy. I hope her final days are relatively peaceful," I said firmly, my resolve hardening into diamond. "But I will not be a part of them. Do not call this number ever again." I hung up the phone. I didn't block it this time. I simply didn't need to. The boundary was absolute. The massive drawbridge was permanently pulled up, and the fortress was impenetrable. I didn't tell Julia about the call immediately. I drove my Porsche over to Eleanor's house in Boulder. My aunt was in the backyard garden, peacefully tending to her sprawling lavender bushes. I sat down on the wooden porch step and calmly told her about the phone call. Eleanor set her gardening shears down slowly and walked over, sitting close beside me. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't try to dictate my actions or tell me what to do. She just wrapped her arm warmly around my shoulder. "Do you want to go to the hospice?" Eleanor asked gently, her eyes searching mine. "No," I answered honestly, the truth ringing clear in the crisp air. "Then you don't go," she said simply, squeezing my shoulder. "A terminal diagnosis does not magically rewrite history, Liam. You owe her nothing but the peace you've finally fought for and found for yourself." 2 weeks later, my mother passed away. I did not attend the funeral. I didn't read the dramatic obituary printed in the local paper. I didn't check social media to see Julian inevitably playing the tragic, grieving son for sympathy and potential handouts. Instead, I called the most expensive local florist in their town and ordered a massive, beautiful arrangement of pure white lilies. I paid for it with my corporate card. I left the attached card entirely blank. It was a silent, powerful acknowledgement of a life that had ended, delivered by a son who had already painfully grieved her death 4 years ago in an intensive care unit. The day of the funeral, Eleanor and I took a long road trip. We took the silver Porsche 911, the powerful engine roaring through the winding, majestic mountain passes of Colorado. We parked near a pristine, crystal-clear alpine lake. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a small, elegant wooden urn. It wasn't my mother's ashes. It was the ashes of Eleanor's mother, my grandmother, the remarkable woman who had raised Eleanor to be strong, kind, and fiercely protective of those she loved. Eleanor had kept them safely for years, waiting patiently for the exact right moment to let them go. We stood together by the edge of the freezing water. The wind was crisp and cold, biting at our cheeks, but the sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the lake. "To the strong women who raised us," Eleanor said, her clear voice carrying over the rushing mountain wind. "And to the women who saved us. Sometimes they are the exact same person, and sometimes they aren't." She gently scattered the ashes over the water, watching them catch the golden sunlight before slowly settling into the deep blue depths. I stood beside the incredible woman who had saved my life, the woman who had secretly funded my education, the woman who had stood silently in a dark hospital corridor every single night just to make absolutely sure I kept breathing. I realized then, with absolute clarity, that family is never a biological obligation. Family is a deliberate action. Family is who actually shows up when the lights go out and the world falls apart. I am 33 years old now. My spine is permanently fused with cold titanium, but my spirit has never been more flexible, more resilient. I am a highly respected senior partner, a best-selling author, and a man deeply, unconditionally in love with a woman who respects me as an equal. I survived the devastating fire my parents set, and I used the ashes to build an empire they can never touch. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. The absolute hardest lesson I ever had to learn was that you cannot save people who are fiercely determined to drown you just to keep themselves afloat. Setting a strict boundary isn't an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to find the courage to walk away from the very people who were supposed to love you the most? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.